Here it comes. News and Views with Dr. Larry Bates, Chuck Bates, and you. It's what talk radio was meant to be. Former banker and legislator, best-selling author of The New Economic Disorder, and economist Dr. Larry Bates, and economist and former White House aide Chuck Bates host, moderate, and sometimes referee 2 hours of hard-nosed news and no-holds-barred views, much of which is provided by you and their guests. Now, let's get right to it. Here are your hosts, Dr. Larry Bates and Chuck Bates.
And on a Wednesday afternoon, good afternoon, I'm Ron Allen. John Russell, our national senior correspondent, is with me in the studio. Dr. Bates and Chuck are both on assignment today. We're delighted to have you with us, and we have a good lineup for you I think you'll enjoy. Michael Rosenbaum will be with us in a couple of moments. He has authored a book called 6 Tires, No Plan. You might say, what the dickens is that all about? Well, if you own a business or have ever owned a business or work for someone that owns a business, which you obviously do if you're working, you will want to hear the story of one of the richest men in America. You've probably never even heard his name, but Michael Rosenbaum knows all about him. We're going to talk about him in a moment and the model that this gentleman has used to create one of the giants of industry in the United States. Chris Fabry will be with us. He has written a book called Not in the Heart. He's a moody radio host, author of several books. The reason we're dealing with it is because it deals with addictions and restoration. We'll talk about that too. Bill Wilson, president of Americans for Limited Government, will be here talking about Obama and oil. Then Dan Kish, the vice president of policy for the Institute of Energy Research, will pick up on that. Connie Lawn will wrap things up for us. Right now, Michael Rosenbaum is on with us. Mr. Rosenbaum, thanks. I know you've got a busy schedule. Thanks for joining us today. I loved your book.
Well, thanks, Ron. I think we can end the interview right here.
No, I want people to hear about this man, the story of one of America's richest, most unknown men, and his name is
Bruce Holley.
And tell us what he owns.
Bruce Holley owns a company called Discount Tire. They're the largest independent tire retailer in the country. Then they have about a 10% market share operating in only half the states. So, multiply that, you would think if they were national, they would be about 10% of the whole country. It's a very incredible success story because this is a guy who started out with less than nothing, meaning on paper he was bankrupt, less than nothing, opens a store, and just by basically treating people right over a period of years, including both customers and employees, builds it up till he's now number 96 on the Forbes 400 list, making him the 96th wealthiest guy in America.
Let me stop you for just a second because you brushed over something and you could have lost some people right there and said, well, he opened a store and lots of folks, oh, well, that ends me. I'm not in it. I haven't got any investment. Tell him about the store he opened and how he opened it.
Okay. Bruce had failed in a couple of business ventures, and the last of which was a auto parts distribution business. And so he had, and this is where the title of the book comes from, he had 6 tires to his name. 4 of them were retreads. And on January 1st of 1960, he opened up a little shop to sell those tires in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in the shadow of a Goodyear tire store. So you would think, of all the places to open, you should never open 300 feet from a really big competitor. It was about 3 days before the first customer walked in. It was a week before he sold his first tire. And that was the beginning of what's been an incredible journey for a guy.
And he was there by himself doing the tires, changing the tires, sweeping the floors, cleaning the bathrooms.
Everything. Yeah.
Absolutely everything. Painted the building himself or painted the outside and the inside of the thing. The book is so, I couldn't set it down, and when I finished, I was sitting next to the fire with my wife, and she looked at me and she said, you lose some more friends? And I said, yes, every time I finish a book, but this one, Bruce Holley was born in 1930, 82 years old. The man honestly seemed like an older brother to me. Everyone should study the model for operating a business. Give us some of the salient points of what his philosophy in running a business and getting some of the lost boys in life started right.
Well, he runs a business for whatever reason. He has a view, and I can tell you some examples of why. He has a view that when someone does something for you, you not only owe it back to them, but you got to pay it forward to someone else. And that view has carried him on in life and enabled him to find other guys who have the same view about paying forward. And those are the people who become his store managers. So one of the great things that I found, and this is something that all your listeners would relate to, there's nothing special about Bruce Holly. And I say that knowing all the achievements he's made. There's nothing special in the sense that he's not Steve Jobs. He didn't invent computers. He's not Albert Einstein. He didn't invent the theory of relativity. He's a guy like everybody else. Every one of your listeners could be Bruce Holly. So what is it that he did that most people don't do? First, he's a hardworking guy. He just believes that you got to work hard to make things go, and he is a hardworking guy. But he believes in something bigger than himself. Partly that's going to Catholic school and being trained by and being trained in Catholic school. But part of that is knowing that other people have believed in him and given him opportunities that then he says it's his job now to give to somebody else. So the pay it forward idea in his company is something that really drives a lot of success, both for him and everybody else in the business. I'm not sure that answered your question.
Yes, indeed. One of the things that stood out in my reading the book was the fact that he never set goals for his managers as he began to develop stores. Incidentally, friends, he has over 800 stores, and it's a privately owned company.
Right.
The 800 stores, but as he was beginning, as he would set goals, and actually he didn't set them, he would let the managers set their own goals that were achievable, not to stretch them, but to make sure they were achievable, so that when these goals were reached, and they weren't easy goals, he certainly reviewed them, that the manager would say, I did it, instead of going home to his wife, downtrodden and hangdog, and saying, I couldn't reach that goal. They're going to can me. I couldn't reach that goal. He was just the opposite. I can't believe a man had that kind of thinking in him.
Well, I think the key to that is he hires the right people. And basically, and this is one of the things you find when you talk to the people who work for him. He hires people who have a certain amount of life view, worldview like himself, about paying forward, about being part of a team, about service to other people. Because those people will work harder for the company and they'll work harder for the customer. They'll be more loyal. They'll be more committed to the mission. So if you have a bunch of people who are committed to fulfilling the goal, you don't have to beat them up all the time. And in much of American business today, as you know, everyone sets these stretch goals where they say, well, we want to get 8%, so we'll tell everyone we want 20%, and then most of them won't make it, but maybe we'll get 8%. What that does, because people realize on day one they can't get 20%, is it demoralizes them. They don't even try. So he might go in and say, well, we want 8. We'll tell them that 6. We'll push for 6. And when they get up to 6, they've got so much momentum going, they'll get up to 8.
Mm-hmm.
So it's common sense when you explain it, but it's not the way business is done most of the time.
No, it normally isn't. I used a term a moment or so ago, and I'd like you to elaborate on it. I referenced the lost boys. Now, that might conjure up in someone's mind a picture that's inaccurate. Would you explain the lost boys and who they were?
Yeah, I picked that up from Peter Pan. The Lost Boys didn't have particular direction in life and followed Peter Pan, and to some extent, there's some of that at Discount Tire. There's a chapter in the book called The Lost Boys because this is a book about him, but really it's also about the people whose lives are affected by him because that's part of how a life gets lived in context of others. He, the prototypical guy who's running a Discount Tire store, got out of high school, maybe went to college, maybe didn't finish, or maybe did, but he had no particular direction in life, no particular goals, no particular skills, but was willing to work hard and wanted to find a place that would reward it. And so that place is Discount Tire. These people who I met with, store managers and assistant store managers and doing my research for the book, they all told the same story. I'm starting out where Bruce Holly started out. I'm starting out in the back of a tire store and I'm working, but someday I'll get the keys to a store, or someday I'll get to be an assistant VP, or someday. So they have a belief system there, and that belief system is reinforced because the company only promotes from within for its operating jobs. And that's important because every guy who gets to be a store manager gets to be a store manager in competition with every other assistant store manager. They don't bring someone in, some hotshot from Harvard, to come in and take over a store because he's got an MBA.
Now, let's just to clarify that a little. They do bring in people from the outside for tax work and that sort of thing, but
attorneys, attorneys, accountants, that sort of thing.
But if you want to manage a store and make a 6 or 7 figure income, which they do, friends, which they do, you have to start at the tire base. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce did, CEO Tom Engler did, Vice Chairman Gary Van Brunt did, COO Steve Fournier did, all the way down the row from the top of the company to the bottom. In every operating position in the company, somebody started out in the back of a tire store.
I guess probably people would say, well, I want my boy doing that. I don't want him to be a grease monkey. And, well, let me tell you something, friends. If you work for a guy like Bruce Halley, and he cared as much about you as Bruce Halley cares for his employees, you'd say to your son, forget whatever else you got planned. Go get a job at Discount Tire. It's an incredible story, an incredible success story, and I think 2 of the things that made it that way, well, 3. First of all, Semper Fi. Bruce is a former Marine.
There are no former Marines.
That's very true.
Just
none of
retired,
us.
sort of.
Absolutely. We also saw in the book the loyalty that he not only had to his employees, right, he's 82 years old now, right up until this day, but the loyalty that he has to his wife and to his God. Now, Jerry, his first wife, passed away 6 years later. He married Diane, and she stretched him a little bit into new areas. But the loyalty this man displayed in every area of his life absolutely astonished me.
Yeah. He had a very close relationship with his mom. He really wanted to help his mom out a lot. And he sees the importance of being of that loyalty. You mentioned his faith. He is clearly a man of strong faith. But one of the interesting things, and you hear it from a lot of his people, he doesn't tell everyone else what their faith should be. As a practicing Catholic and very in tune with his faith, he also recognizes himself as a flawed human being. And that helps keep him grounded, I think.
In a moment, we're going to come back. We're getting ready for a break in about a minute, I guess, something like that. We're talking to Michael Rosenbaum. Michael has authored a book called 6 Tires, No Plan, the story of one of America's richest, most unknown men. He is Bruce Halley, the sole owner and the developer founder of Discount Tire, and a story with a business model in it that anybody that runs any kind of a business, has any employees, needs to get this book, 6 Tires, No Plan. Read this book and put it to work. When we come back, Michael, I'm going to ask you a little bit about his parents and where he came from. We'll be back in a minute with news and views. Don't go away.
Stay right here. There's more news and views with Dr. Larry Bates, Chuck Bates, and you, right here on the Information Radio Network. Now, here are more news and views with Dr. Larry Bates and Chuck Bates.
I'm Ron Allen. John Russell, our national senior correspondent, is in the studio with me, and we're listening to Michael Rosenbaum tell us about his latest book, 6 Tires, No Plan, the story of Bruce Halley, one of the wealthiest men in America, a self-made man who owns 800 discount tire stores, where he came from, and the incredible business model that is explained in this book. Michael, I mentioned before we went in the break that I'd like you to talk a little bit about Bruce's mother and father and his childhood, because people might think, well, they had a silver spoon stuck in his mouth the minute he was born. That's not so, is it?
It's not, and it's one of the many ways in which when people read 6 Tires, No Plan, they can get a sense that they too could be Bruce Halley. Maybe not make $1 billion, but achieve a lot more success in life no matter where you start. There was nothing special about Bruce's childhood. He was born during the Depression in the town called Berlin, Vermont, New Hampshire, and his dad was a fireman. His mom was a stay-at-home mom. He had 5 brothers and 2 sisters in the family. And
the brothers were typical brothers. They had their problems with each other, didn't they?
They did. Bruce was the second child, and he and his brother Bob
Fred Jr.
He and his brother Fred Jr. There's so many guys in the family I can't keep them straight. He and his brother were always fighting and competing with each other, just like brothers do. But through it all, what you got when you follow his story as a child is pretty much what Middle America was and is. The family's close knit. They live near their relatives. They talk. They have friends and regular friends and family and so on. But one of the things that Bruce, go ahead.
I'm sorry?
No, one of the things that Bruce learned early about sharing and about paying forward was kind of interesting. Their family didn't have much money. His dad was lucky in that he was a fireman, so he had one of those government jobs you hear about, but he worked through the Depression. And the family wasn't making much money, but there were people who were worse off. So every so often when they would go to a movie, his folks would give him and his brothers an extra dime to take a friend to the movie. And that stuck with Bruce. I mean, things like that happen in our childhood that stick with us really make a difference later in life. The idea that if you have an extra dime, you should give it to somebody, or every so often you should give it to somebody, really stuck with him.
Well, I go back again to the model that all of that, having grown up like that, and then gone in the military, and his brother was in the military, he was also in the Marines.
Yeah.
And growing up with all that behind him, and even though he and his brother were at odds occasionally, and his dad was absent from the home because he was working crazy hours, his mom was solid. The mom and dad were together. They were in love. And when he married Jerry, and they were inseparable, according to Bruce Halley. That was his.
Not just according to Bruce Halley, according to everybody. His dad married his high school sweetheart, and Bruce married his high school sweetheart. And they stayed married, till death do us part, both. So, it's a story that repeats itself.
And just so people won't think that the multi-billions of dollars that Bruce Halley has put together are just for his own aggrandizement and pleasure, his profit-sharing plans for his employees, his rewards plans, the beneficial things he does for charities and organizations, they're legend in his circles, aren't they?
Well, people know Bruce to be a very generous guy, but the last person who ends up talking about that is Bruce, and that's one of the things I really liked about him as I was doing the interview, the interviews and the research for the book. This is a guy who does a lot for other people, but he's much more likely to tell you about something that someone else did for him.
Well, like every time he would go visit one of his 800 stores, he ends up in the bays talking to the guys working out there, asking about their families and all. Michael, it's been great having you with us. I want to say again, the name of the book, friends, is 6 Tires, No Plan. 4 of those tires were retreads, incidentally. 6 Tires, No Plans. The story of Bruce Halley. Get the book if you have any interest in business at all. You need it on your shelf. Michael, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Ron.
We'll be back with more in just a moment. Chris Ferry coming up shortly.